I'm going to stand up. Judges get to sit down when they work, but lawyers, trial lawyers, have to stand up most of the time. Let me start by saying that it's a real privilege for me to be back here on my old campus. I view the University of Texas campus in Austin more generally as a sort of sanctuary of independent thought in a vast wilderness. And so I appreciate very much the fact that I've been invited back. It means also a great deal to me that I didn't know that there were going to be exonerees here. But Mr. Brandley, Mr. Burrell, Mr. Kiney, Margaret Kiney is the guy with the cap on right here. He's the cranky old bastard that I've told you all about. He was the chairman of his county Republican Party back in Michigan after he was exonerated from death row for being at the wrong place at the wrong time in New Mexico. And Mr. Graham as well. It's a great pleasure to have the opportunity to talk not only to you but to these exonerees as well. It's also a great privilege, by the way, to share the podium with Charlie Baird. I say that because Charlie has been in this vineyard for a lot longer than I have. I was still, he was working in this vineyard when I was still taking the position over and over again that the bastard should be fried. And I started coming around in 2000 and then came around completely in 2005. And so it's my privilege today to have the opportunity to speak not only to you, but all over the country in opposition to the death penalty. By way of background, to tell you a little more about my background than Huma indicated, I was the district attorney in San Antonio in the mid-1980s. The voters in Bexar County, by the way, had the same, what did you call it, illness and fatigue problem in 1986 when I came up for re-election. But I prosecuted death penalty cases, and I compiled a perfect record in those cases. Each and every defendant that I charged with capital murder was convicted, and all of those men have been executed in your name. I'm not bragging. I say these things to make a point, and my point is that I'm not a wild-eyed, pointy-headed liberal social scientist type. I have, and I've done more than just talk the talk on this issue. I've walked the walk. I lived in the belly of the beast for years. I've made the decisions that had to be made. Nobody ever accused me of being soft on crime back in those days, but today I'm an opponent of the death penalty, and the principal reason why I'm an opponent of the death penalty is because of what I experienced in 2005 when the Houston Chronicle did its piece on one of my cases. The Houston Chronicle, beginning in 2004, took a hard look at the Reuben Cantu case, one of my cases. I prosecuted it in 1985. And they made the determination that Cantu was innocent. I was contacted. They asked me for comment. I told them that I would have to review the file, that I didn't remember anything about the file. I looked at the file and I was shocked about what I saw. And the reason why I was shocked, frankly, was that I couldn't believe that I had made the decision in 1985 to prosecute and seek the death penalty based on the eyewitness testimony of a single eyewitness. I prosecute, in a lot of states you can't do that. A lot of states the prosecutor is not free to prosecute with nothing more than eyewitness testimony, or at least a single eyewitness. There has to be a form of corroboration, but in Texas that corroboration was not required in 1985. You know, we had in the Cantu case an incredibly savage crime. A horrible shooting, a murder victim. Our eyewitness was the survivor of the attack. He was shot 9 times and somehow managed to survive. And he fingered Reuben Cantu. He fingered Reuben Cantu, you should know, after he was presented with 3 separate photo arrays. And the only thing that the photo arrays had in common with each other was that the same picture of Reuben Cantu was in each of those 3. If we get the kind of reforms that Charlie was talking about earlier out of the legislature this time or next time, what happened in the Reuben Cantu case would not be able to happen today. But in any event, after the 3rd photo array, our eyewitness fingered Cantu. Cantu, of course, took the position that he was not there. The Cantu case, you should also know, is not one of those horrible cases that you read about in the paper where prosecution misconduct is involved. Everything was disclosed to the defense. The issue of the photo IDs, the powerful suggestion that was made because of the fact that his picture appeared over and over again, was fully litigated, pre-trial and at trial. The judge didn't believe it at pre-trial. The jury didn't believe it at trial. Cantu was convicted. He was executed in 2003, and everybody forgot about him until 2004, when the Houston Chronicle started turning rocks over to see what would crawl out. And what crawled out from under the rock was the recantation by our compelling eyewitness of his trial testimony. Now, I'm not convinced as I stand before you today that Reuben Cantu was innocent. But what shocked me when I looked at the file, as I indicated earlier, was that I made the decision that I did. And I took the position shortly after I reviewed the case that my decision to prosecute Cantu on the basis of the testimony of a single eyewitness was a serious mistake in judgment, and I've acknowledged that publicly. I also, in the aftermath of the Cantu case, assumed personal responsibility for his execution. As much as I'd like to tell you that I'm the only former major metropolitan prosecutor in America who finds himself in the position of having to admit an error in judgment that may have led to the execution of an innocent man, I'm confident that I'm not. I'm confident that there are others. But I strongly believe, as Judge Baird has suggested, that prosecutors whose best efforts produce unfortunate results in death penalty cases have a moral obligation to assume responsibility for their mistakes. And I think that that's a crucial part of the process, because the very first rule in our Code of Criminal Procedure is a rule that imposes a duty that is unique. It exists all over the country, but it's unique in the criminal justice system, and it applies only to the prosecutor. And that is the obligation, the statutory obligation, to do more than just convict. The statutory obligation of the district attorney, the prosecutor, to do everything in his power to see to it that justice is done. My belief is that that obligation doesn't end when a DA leaves office. I think that obligation always exists. And that's the reason why I assume personal responsibility for the execution of Reuben Cantu. I want to talk for a second, a few minutes actually, about the most incredible experience of my life. You know, when I went through the Cantu experience in 2004 and decided to become an outspoken opponent of the death penalty, I believed at that point that I had migrated as far as I could on the issue. In all of my speeches around the country, I always emphasized the fact that my opposition to the death penalty was practical rather than moral, that my opposition to the death penalty was based on the fact that we have a system that is driven by decisions that are made by fallible human beings. And that as long as that's the case, the opportunity for errors will exist, and we simply can't have that in death penalty cases, period. And so, but I always emphasized that my opposition was not moral. But I had an incredible experience in June of last year. And my position changed. My position today, because of that experience, is that I oppose the death penalty on practical grounds, but also on moral grounds. I'll bet you that none of you ever imagined that you would come to a meeting like this and hear somebody with my background say the things that I've just said. But I want you to know that I am in this fight to end the death penalty, money, marbles, and chalk. And I will be in this fight. My wife hates it when I make this statement. She's heard me make it before, but she's going to hear it again. I will be in this fight with you until the last dog dies. Before I tell you about the experience that changed my life, I want to tell you about leaving the city where it occurred first. I was clearing security in Philadelphia in June of last year. And this cheeky woman was in front of me in line, and she turned to me and she said, "Do you see all of these people?" She said, "There's not a single human being in this airport who had as interesting a weekend as I did." And when you're going through security, you don't want to start arguments with people, right? But I couldn't resist the temptation. I turned to her and I said, "Ma'am," I said, "I don't have any idea what you spent your weekend doing, but I promise you that whatever it wasn't as interesting as the way I spent my weekend." She asked me how I spent my weekend. I told her, and she said, "You win." Because I had spent what was clearly for me the most profoundly moving weekend of my life. I spent the weekend on a farm, I guess it was, some sort of a farm-like facility in Pennsylvania near Valley Forge with 15 men who had three things in common with each other. You know what they were? The first thing that they had in common with each other is that they had all been convicted of capital murder. The second thing that they had in common with each other is that they had all spent years on death row. In some cases, more than 20 years on death row. And the third thing that they had in common with one another was that they were there with me. They were not on death row. And the reason why they were there with me was because they were innocent.
Yep.
They had been exonerated and they had been freed. And they were there at Valley Forge with me that weekend. And I spent I spent 2 days staring into the living faces of the death penalty. You know, one of the things that we try to do, and I spent lots of time and lots of energy traveling all across this country trying to establish that we have executed an innocent person. And you can't do it. You simply can't do it. In the clearest cases, there's always an argument on the other side. There couldn't be a clearer case than the Willingham case, and yet when I talk about Willingham, I always ask for hands, and most of the people still believe that the guy was guilty.
Huh.
And this isn't a case in which there was no evidence, no proof that a crime was even committed. And yet it happens. The thing, though, that was so incredible about looking into the faces and hearing the stories about what it was like to be on death row, about what it's like to be confined in a 6-foot by 9-foot cell, 23 hours a day, what it's like after exoneration, trying to learn again, just to trust a single human being, trying to get a job, It was incredible. I shared a room that weekend with a force of nature, an incredible personality, Rolando Cruz from the state of Illinois. Rolando is a person of uncommon intelligence. He is a person of enormous charisma. He's the kind of person who, if he had an MBA or if he had a law degree, would be a Fortune 500 CEO today, or a compelling trial lawyer today. But he was born in the projects. Food chain was different where he was born. But he rose to the top. He became the charismatic leader of a notorious Chicago gang. In 1983, he was framed for the murder of a little girl in Naperville, Illinois. He was convicted on the basis of the testimony of 6 jailhouse snitches, all of whom received either the dismissal or a reduction of their charges. He was tried 3 different times, convicted 3 times. His conviction was reversed twice. He spent 12 years on death row. Even though the person who was responsible for the murder came forward in 1985 and confessed, Rolando was not cleared until 1993, when DNA evidence established conclusively that he was not the rapist, that he was not the murderer. In the aftermath of Rolando's case, 7 police officers and prosecutors were tried for fabricating evidence and suborning perjury. I shared a room with him. It was incredible. We talked about his case. We talked about what his life has been like since he was released in 1993. Has he gotten into trouble since then? Not that I know of. He lives quietly. He's a single father. He's raising his 3 daughters by himself. If Randy Steidle walked in here today and sat down at the end of one of these rows, you would think that he was a successful Austin businessman. He's bright, he's articulate, he's engaging. What you wouldn't know unless you talked to him was that he spent 17 years on death row, also in Illinois. He was there because he complained about police corruption. About the time that he complained about police corruption, Karen Rhodes became concerned because she saw her boss putting weapons in the trunk of his car and piles of money. They worked in a business in which there wasn't any cash, but he had piles and piles of money. What she also didn't know was that her boss was the target of an undercover DEA investigation at the time that was looking at the Chicago mob's laundering of drug money through pizza parlors in small towns. One of those small towns was the town where Randy lived. Within weeks of the time that Karen Rhodes saw what her boss was putting in the trunk of her car, she and her husband had been stabbed to death. Their house had been burned to the ground, and the corrupt police officers that Randy had complained about were doing their best to hang the killings on him. And they did. They got the town drunk. They got a woman with a history of mental illness to testify against him. He was convicted. He was sentenced to die. Within days of the end of the trial, both of the witnesses recanted their trial testimony. They have since then recanted the recantations and recanted the recantations of the recantations, and on and on and on. They both claim to have witnessed the crime. They both claim to have seen Randy kill the Rhodes, the husband and wife. But what they also claim, Judge, was that both of them claimed that the other one was not there, which is sort of interesting. In any event, 17 years later, Randy was cleared when it was established that the knife that was at the center of the prosecution's case could not have been the murder weapon. One night, late after we'd been drinking beer in Pennsylvania, I was walking back to my room and I found Randy in the dark. He was sitting in the dark on a bench and he was crying. And he looked up and he saw me, he was embarrassed. He said, "Sam," he said, "I'm trying really, really hard not to be pissed off." And we talked. We talked about what it was like for him to stuff paper in his ears to keep the roaches out. We talked about what it was like to be close to within hours of execution twice, not once, but twice, for a crime that somebody else committed. And then there's Albert. I spent some time with Albert too. Albert's the most delightful guy that you'll ever meet. But one of the things that Connie did was you'll remember this. Connie got Albert with a beer to confess to the crime that had put him on death row. It had happened in just a few minutes for a beer. Can you imagine what it would be like if somebody who would confess to a crime that he couldn't have committed is being handled and interrogated by people who are skilled? And that's what happens every day in police departments across our country.
And he's completely 100% innocent.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Couldn't have committed the crime. By the way, when Albert was released after 13 years in Angola, the Louisiana prison officials pushed him out the door with a suit that was what, 3 sizes too big? And what did they give you, a $10 bill?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah. That's the way they do it in Louisiana. Now, I want to close with a thought, and that thought is this. And the thing that I want to emphasize is that what this fight is all about, and what the reason why it's so important that we win is this is not about the 3,000 men and women that are on death rows across the country who have committed horrible crimes. What it's about are those few, like these 3 men here and Clarence Brantley up there, who were so close to death, who were innocent, and who were so close to death. These are good people. These are the kind of people that you would have dinner with on Friday night. But yet at the same time, the thing that we have to remember is that they're the lucky ones.
Mm-hmm.
They're the lucky ones.
Mm-hmm.
These are men whose lives give new meaning to the old maxim, "There but for the grace of God, go I." What this fight is about are the people on death rows across the country who are innocent. But more important, it's about us. It's about the promise that we made to ourselves and each other a long time ago when we agreed to give the government this awesome power that it has. And that promise was, and that promise remains today, that our courts will guarantee the protection of the innocent. And the fact is that even though they do it most of the time is simply not good enough. Thank you.